Late here. Cool. I think we'll just jump straight into it. So my name's Jordan. I am the program director, as Dan said, for the games courses which you're here to hear about today. Um, I've been at media design school, gosh, 10 years, just over 10 years now, and I've been in games this whole time. So I'm always excited to share these programs because it's something I'm super passionate about, and really proud that we're able to offer these courses. You know, it's not every day that you get to be able to study an entire degree focused on video games, whether that's art or programming. And it's something that's still, despite being around for 10 years, is fairly unique about MDS. There's not a lot of places that let you I guess, focus to that degree that we do here on these kinds of subjects. The first thing you may be wondering is why we're doing a talk on game art and programming at the same time. Aren't these two very different things? But it is in fact intentional that we have these two together. And I would like the takeaway really for you guys to be that art is technical and programming is creative. And it's really the thing that makes this course special is the fact that it's programmers working with artists, artists working with programmers, with the idea that you're going to get a final portfolio piece, or in fact, multiple portfolio pieces that are of a high quality. So for artists, that they will be games that you can actually play. And for programmers, it's not just an implementation, but something that actually has artistic polish and is a complete game experience. So that's why we're talking about both at the same time. You will be collaborating between degrees the whole way through, and that's something that's quite unique, I think, about our approach. To start off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the art course, then I'm going to move into the programming. And feel free to ask questions as we go, or Dan can call them out if there's anything of particular interest. I don't mind if we wait to the end or not. Cool. So for the art side, the first thing that you'll be learning is 2D art. This is most people's approach to game art in terms of experience that most people have. You know, you don't always find that people coming into the course have experience in 3D. Often they're coming from high school or maybe a different industry, but everyone's drawn at some point. So we really want to focus on 2D art, highlight those skills, really thinking about things like concept art, 2D art and animation, visual effects, user interface. And that's a really good sort of baseline before moving into some of the more technical subjects. We do both like digital painting as well as sort of game ready assets, sprite work, UI things that are going to be there in a game project. Obviously, the other big area of game art is going to be 3D. So modeling, characters, environments, vehicles, weapons, really whatever you want. We don't so much dictate style here at school. So people are invited to do something more photorealistic, to do something more stylized. It's really up to the student and what kind of portfolio they want to create for themselves. If it wasn't obvious, everything I'm showing here is all student work in this presentation, to just kind of give an idea of the kinds of things that you might make while you're at school. Here's some examples of some of the work from year 3, just showing kind of the higher end stuff that people can kind of get to. Also for artists, technical art is really important. So using game engines, being able to do basic scripting, being able to make visual effects, lighting, cinematography, this kind of stuff can be quite technical. And in fact, even 3D can be quite technical as well. To the point that we even would have artists in their first year making their own games, making their first games on their own before working with programmers to give you exposure to that technical experience. It is a generalist course in the sense that you do 2D, 3D, technical art, level design, but it is specialized in the sense that all of these things are related back to games. What you'll find in the games industry is that you will often find smaller companies have more generalist roles, while bigger companies have more specialized roles. But every company benefits from a person who's competent, who can do more than one thing, whether it's your main profession or just opening the ability for you to communicate with other people in the team. And it's really become kind of a standard expectation that game artists are able to implement their own assets and engine and should have some experience in Unity and Unreal. And that's something that we definitely focus on. So this is kind of like the fundamental stuff. 2D, 3D, tech art is kind of the basis of what makes up most of the art qualification. While the artists are learning art, the programmers are unsurprisingly learning how to program. We start with C++. This is a low-level programming language, meaning it's closer to the computer's architecture. It's not the easiest language to learn, But if you learn C++, you can move really into most languages like C Sharp, Java, Python, what have you, on top of this, and you will be able to transition okay. So we intentionally teach C++, one, because it's a common language in game programming, and it's the language that Unreal Engine uses. But also learning C++ is really a platform as a software engineer to give you a skill set that can transition into any coding environment. You'll notice a lot of institutions won't start with C++. They might do C Sharp or Python. They are more beginner friendly. But I think if you're coming here to get a job in the industry, it's better to have a more robust skill set because you will be able to learn those other languages much more quickly if you know C++. Year one really for us is all about building foundation for programmers. You will do maths. You'll learn programming outside of game engines as well, like 2D game programming using C++ to make your own game, as well as general software engineering principles and game engines. So we want you to first and foremost be a programmer, not just a games programmer. You will see that if you search up how to make a game on YouTube, you will find 20-minute tutorials that show you how to program your first game. In a sense, this is true, but it's not giving you an actual foundation in software engineering. And that's really what we want here. We want you to be able to work in any engine, in any studio as a programmer and be able to find your feet. And year two, it kind of gets more specialized and you get into more specific areas of engineering with relevance to games, physics programming, programming your own network code, game AI, graphics programming, building tools and editors for artists, doing simulations. This is really where you get the more advanced software engineering skill set that's going to serve you your whole career. The main engines we use right now at MDS are Unity and Unreal. You may have seen other game engines out there, like GameMaker, Godot, Lumberyard. There's a lot of them. And really, we can't say what games is going to be like in 10 years. Technology moves so fast in this space. It's possible that maybe one of these or both of these engines change a lot, or in fact are replaced by something else. So we want to be dynamic. We want to learn concepts first, tools second. In fact, one of the largest game studios here in New Zealand, Grinding Gear Games, who make Path of Exile, they don't use either of these engines. They use their own in-house engine. So while it's important to know a game engine, we want you to have those programming fundamentals so that you can move into any environment and be successful. We also have a feature in the programming course where you get to work with some PlayStation SDKs in year three. That gives you a little bit of exposure to working in a console environment. Something that's true for both degrees, for the art course and the programming course, is game design. You'll be doing this from year one. I liken this to, I don't know, imagine studying to become a script writer if you didn't ever watch a movie. You kind of need to understand the medium that you're working in. So for us, game design is important. You need to be able to make simple games before you worry too much about the technical implementation. We need to think about things like balance, like what makes a game fun? How do we design a good mechanic? How do we design interesting levels? What do we do to make the player engaged? In fact, why should a game be balanced? What if we do a game that's purposely unbalanced, and can that be fun? So this is something that artists and programmers both do to really improve their literacy and the kinds of projects that they can make, because both disciplines are kind of limited if you don't have a good understanding of games and you don't have a strong literacy. Someone's asked a question in chat. If a student wants to switch from game programming to IT, is that possible? Do you mean in terms of like you want to change degrees? Because we also have an IT degree, like you could start the game degree and then move to that. If that's the question, yeah, it absolutely is. You will have some core IT papers that you will have to take, but you can transition between qualifications. In fact, it's probably the easiest going from game programming to the IT degree because they have a whole lot of elective slots that you could use the game papers for. So you would be fine, yeah. Yeah, the other part of that question, just in case anyone's interested, would be if I did game programming, could I get a job in the IT industry? Yes, you could 100%. You can transition from game programming to any technical programming, computer engineering job. The one thing to say is it might take a little bit of work on your part to build a portfolio that's suitable for that. Because, for example, here, you're going to graduate with a portfolio of games. So if you wanted to say work in web development, you might need to also learn a little bit of HTML, build your own website on the side, but you would definitely have the skills that you need. The other side that's important for both degrees, these are degrees. There are a lot of places in New Zealand where you can study games, but they are not degree qualifications. They are 1-year diploma. They're sort of more short course format. You don't get the level of depth that we have here. And part of that is we need to make sure that we're covering our academic bases to a high enough degree for this qualification. You are positioned that if you wanted to do your master's after this course, you could. If you wanted to transition to another engineering field or another art field, you definitely could. So as part of that, we do have some research elements in the course. However, these are all focused on games. We don't really have any classes that aren't focused on games. So out of 24 subjects, they're all about games, which is really what makes the course an exception. I remember at my uni when I studied, you could do 2 or 3 electives in computer science and media studies that might have some game components, but there was no way that you could pick 24 subjects that were all about video games. So while we have that research obligation as part of a degree, we do focus it there. So the image on the left is a student project that was a game for change about exploring chronic fatigue syndrome. And because we are programmers and artists, we don't need to always do our research through the written form. We sometimes have games, we have presentations, and this particular one was about chronic fatigue using the mechanic of a stamina meter, where you have a number of tasks you need to do each day, but you never have enough stamina. So it's kind of exploring what it's like being someone living with chronic fatigue through gameplay. The research project on the right was a magazine that a student made exploring level design and how do I do things like present a corridor where the player can go left or right. It's a free choice, but I want the player to go left every single time. What can I do in terms of the design of the level, the shape, the lighting to lead the player to the right direction? How do I deceive the player thinking that they have control, but they're actually playing into my design? So really interesting topic. It's about semiotics. They built a little game to go with the magazine. That's just like a small example of the kinds of things we do in this space. But I think there are some interesting questions in terms of games research. Why do we play games? Should we censor games in different ways from film? What about the ethics of games, things like microtransactions, gambling? What about the representation of art? Should you be able to make any kind of art that you want? Is it the ultimate form of free speech? Or should there be some limits on the kinds of things that we do inside a video game? Are there some sorts of games we wouldn't want to make? There's technical research too in terms of how do we optimize things, how do we design levels for this genre. There's really a lot to go on here, and in year one, the first thing you do is video game history. You're playing old console games like Atari to try and understand their designs. Like I said, we want you to have a good literacy. You're doing this as a degree because you want to have a long-term career in this field. We're not about just showing you 3 quick tricks how to use a piece of software to get a portfolio that looks passable. We want to set you up with a skill set that's not just going to get you your junior position, but give you the tools you need to get to senior positions later in your career. And that's why all this stuff's important. Games are meant to be played, so we're also about events, going to Armageddon, showcases, trying to be involved in the community. We do things like Girls in Games, which is an initiative working with high school students to give them exposure to the industry. We want this to be a really social experience because despite what a lot of people think, making games, art and programming, it takes a lot of time behind the computer, practicing your craft to get good at what you want to do. But when you actually get to production, it's a very social experience, and often the thing that gets people, to similar portfolios, one gets the job, one doesn't, is down to the communication skills and working with the team, and that's something that you're going to learn here at school. It was just last week, I got a great endorsement from A44 Games, who make a game called Ashen, who are going to be releasing a new game soon called Flintlock. Their comment about our students was that they prefer to hire MDS students because they are up and running in the studio, being productive within 2 weeks of being employed, whereas students from other schools tend to take a lot longer, potentially 6 months, to get up to speed. And this is because we simulate the studio environment. You are already making games while you're at school, and you're already working with artists and programmers, which is just a huge advantage. We're big on industry. We have guest talks almost every month, I would say, if not more. Just this week, we have Dean Hall. He was here last week. He's the person who made DayZ. He came in last week to check out the 3rd year games. He liked them so much, he's coming back tomorrow to do another round, seeing the same games, but just wanted to be able to spend more time on them. On Friday, we have someone up from Cerebral Fix, who's actually a grad of ours, just coming to check out the year 3 presentation. So it's very normal for us to be connected to industry in this way. Some of our faculty are from industry, and we have really great ties with a lot of studios. I think the best sell, if I'm just to put on my sort of sales pitch, 25% of the games industry in New Zealand is from MDS. So as a result of that, every studio that you could think of is going to have some kind of connection back to the school, and people are generally very giving. It's a small community, it's a small industry, and because of that, most companies are very happy to share their time and kind of look out for those coming next. Yeah, a couple of interesting examples. But yeah, the highlight really, I think what everyone's here to see, game projects. Let me start by saying you make a game project, or I think every semester. You make a game in year one, you make them in year two, you make small projects, big projects. Before you get to year three, actually, I should say, before you get to your final project, you've probably made about 10 or 12 smaller ones, 10 or 12 small games. Some of them might be a week long, some of them might be a month long, some of them might be 4 months long, but you'll have a whole variety of projects and experience working in teams to kind of know what you want to do for your final game, to be able to work with the artists and programmers in your class, to understand like who's on the same page creatively, who you enjoy working with, to be able to make projects. So what I'm going to show you are some of the year three projects. However, they have made a lot of games before this. This is not the first game that any of these teams have made. Most of these games I'm showing, if you want to search them up on Steam or on itch, you can actually find these online. So this game's called Sky Noon. This is a game, it's a first-person shooter that's about knocking the other players off the map using air-based weapons, which is super cool. This game did really well, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, but yeah, this was made by 3 programmers and 3 artists. Our policy at school is really to have quite small production teams. We really want, the ideal team size to be 4 people, 5 people, at max 6 people. And that's because we want you to have creative ownership over the thing that you're making. We don't want you to be able to, when you show your friends and family this game and they ask, hey, what did you make on this? We don't want you to point, on a production of 20 people and say, yeah, I made that tree off in the background. I want it so that if you worked on this game, you did all the characters, or you did all the visual effects, or you made all of the levels, or you programmed all of the AI, or you did all of the network code. You need to have something unique that's going to be your portfolio going forward into the workplace. And for that reason, we want small teams, lots of games, so everyone's work's different, and it gives you the opportunity to really excel in what you're doing. Here's an interesting one, Fork Nights, also on Steam. This is a barbecue sort of fencing game where you play as different barbecue food and try and joust one another atop barbecues. This one had the added sort of value of the students actually built an arcade machine inside a barbecue that was no longer working, and they were able to take that to events to show it off, which was really, really cool. False Pine, this is a recent game. This is sort of a dark action RPG created, again, 3 artists, 3 programmers, small team. This is maybe visually like one of the strongest games that we've had in quite a while. Everybody on this team got a job upon graduating because the work was so good. This is something that you'll see with games a lot. I know people are going to ask, well, is there a viable career path studying games in New Zealand? There definitely is. But what I will say is that it's very competitive and it's really based on merit. So if you're sort of really excelling and going for it and taking this seriously and putting in a lot of time to your learning, you're going to have a really good outcome. It's definitely not an industry that's easy to get into if you're kind of coasting. It's a very hard industry to do that in. If you think about like a general qualification, like if you were to, for example, study management, how many companies need a manager? Probably most companies, more than 10 staff, arguably even less. How many people are going? How many companies are going to need a game artist or a game programmer? There's just less of them out there, and it does mean it's quite competitive. So the students who are really going for it, I think we're seeing like pretty incredible success. They're getting to companies, they're rising up the ranks, they're getting to do what they want. But it's definitely a bit tougher if you're sort of planning to, not take the course too seriously or sort of coast your way through. I see a question there in chat. How many students do you take for the game art degree? I think in year 1, there's normally, in February, there's normally 50 or 60. In July, there's normally maybe a dozen. July intakes tend to be a lot smaller. By year 3, that 50, 60 sort of goes down to maybe 25, 30 because the workload of the course is quite high. It's not for everyone, and sometimes people struggle a little bit with the difficulty of the program. It is worth mentioning that, like I know there's definitely a perception of it's a private school, it's not a university. So, does that mean it's like a easier qualification. For us, it's definitely not the case. A university degree in New Zealand is 360 credits. The games courses are 420. So they're actually higher workload based on hours. We're also not holding ourselves to sort of, I mean, we are holding ourselves to an academic standard, but the real standard we're holding ourselves to beyond that is actually the industry standard of wanting to get people into work. And for that reason, we're trying to push quite a high quality. Another comment recently got about the course. This was from Dean Hall, actually, who is the CEO of Rocketworks, which is a Auckland game studio. He mentioned that the things that we're seeing in production are not student projects. These are indie game projects that could get funding, that could be released. And that's, really important for us to be able to hit that kind of quality. We're really shooting above what you would normally do in a degree. And the reason that's important to understand is it's not an easy program. It is a lot of work. So you definitely have to be quite serious about wanting to study this. How much per month is the usual entry salary for a game developer in New Zealand? By developer, do you mean like programmer, artist? Guessing programmer, but I can talk about both. It really depends where you work. Some companies that are smaller, that are just trying to establish themselves, sometimes we see, honestly, not too much above minimum wage. I've seen sort of recent salaries maybe starting around 50K for an artist, a little bit higher for a programmer. Programmers tend to get paid a little bit more. However, what we do see is that the ceiling on those salaries gets really high. So after a couple of years, people are looking sort of at 70, 80, 90. It really depends to what level of seniority you can get to. I wouldn't look at some of the US values because the market there is pretty crazy. Someone recently just came back from working at Valve that I know, 300K up is what they were being paid. But I wouldn't set that as a benchmark for yourself. It's definitely a lot more competitive in reality in New Zealand, Australia. But yeah, a couple of years experience. I've seen basically juniors straight out of school, to answer the question, probably go between 50 and 80, depending on the company. And then after a few years, 2, 3, 4, depending on their ability, easily going into the six figures. But it definitely depends on the company, where you're working, how flexible you are with moving, because the studios are really all around New Zealand. I see your fees are more than other schools or universities. Why is that? It's really the two things. One is the workload. There is more subjects in our course than other universities, so it is benchmarked, but because we have more content, it makes the fee a little bit higher. The other aspect of why it is we want to be sort of attracting industry to be able to teach in the classroom. We want to have equipment at school like labs and PCs you can use. If you're an online student, we want to, provide video recordings and give you the best experience. So that's the reason it's priced like that. But the main reason is basically there's more content. There are on paper more subjects than you would have to do at another school. As I'm showing these, you might notice that these games are all very different. One thing I'll say is that we really want, by the time you get to year 3, year 1 starts out very structured, but by the time you get to year 3, it's very open and you can really do what you want to do. In terms of the student games, the lecturers are here as your mentors, as advisors, as people to help coach the team, but we do not consider ourselves producers. These are the students' games, and this is their IP. They can release it, they can sell it, you can do anything you want with these projects. That's really important for us because we want you to be proud of your work. We want you to own it. We don't take any ownership, and we don't dictate the game design or direction. The games that have been made that I'm showing are like this because that's what the teams wanted to make, which is cool because it's why we get such a wide variety of genres. How difficult is the math side of the course? I do find math quite mentally tiring. I got 41 out of 50 on the entrance test. What indication is that? I will say the entrance test in maths is very easy. It's not particularly like difficult. I would look at it a little bit like the road code. Like, we want you to get as near to 4 marks as you can to be comfortable on that. When you are lower down, it's probably just an indication that you're going to need to put in some work in that area. Now, it is worth mentioning you don't need to be great at maths to become a good programmer. but it does make things a whole lot easier. Maths can sometimes be very abstract and theoretical. And you're learning something like trigonometry and you think, okay, like I just want to get back to my gameplay programming. But what you'll realize really quickly is that that trigonometry that you're learning is directly impacting the way that you program a game. I could use trigonometry to figure out the angle to something that I need the AI to travel in, or perhaps I want the AI to intercept um, the player who's running in this direction, and it needs to calculate how long will it be before the player arrives at this point. So I'm not going to chase where they are now, but where they're going to be. It's something where you will get a good basis for maths, but it's really how it intersects with game programming that becomes important. So to answer the question, yeah, you don't necessarily have to be the best at maths, but you have to realize that it is part of the process and you have to trust in that process. If you find it quite mentally tiring, you may find the math work a little bit, yeah, tiring, frustrating, but you have to understand that again, it's setting you up for your whole career. It's not about showing you like just blueprints or a drag and drop interface to quickly throw together a game. You are training, if you're a programmer, to become a software engineer, so you can work in any set of tools. And maths is really the basis for that, and that's why it's so important. I could show a lot of these games. Like we have gosh, probably 10 of these a year, if not more sometimes. Um, but it's just really to give you an indication of the kind of stuff that you could be doing. This is a funny one. An interesting programming challenge of having the gameplay take place upon a sphere. It's kind of like a Super Smash Bros. Style thing where you're trying to throw people off the planets. Yeah, so many cool games coming out all the time. I won't show them all because there are just so many, but yeah, different art styles, different genres. This one's really neat. It's a parkour racing game. And kind of the gimmick here is that there's no top speed on your player character. So normally in racing games, there's some kind of speed limit, right? This you can run infinitely fast. Again, has a lot of technical challenges, but the idea here is the cap on the speed is really just how fast the player can go before they can no longer take those corners. So it's a very cool idea. Um, a couple of things to sort of come to a close on. Games in New Zealand. A lot of people don't realize how rich the New Zealand games industry is. We have a lot of studios all throughout the country. Yeah, all over. And these are all screenshots from commercial games made in New Zealand. Think to yourself how many of these you can name, and if you can name the studios that they're from. As I said, study's a pretty big commitment and it is quite a competitive industry. So I think it's good for you to do some due diligence and understand the environment that you're going into. Can you see yourself making art for any of these games? Do any of these styles resonate with you? Do you think any of these systems are interesting? And can you see how you could possibly fit into some of those teams? You don't need to know exactly where you're going to begin with. I think that's why you study, is also to figure that out. But because it is such a niche industry, I think it's good for you to work out, what game studios are local to you, what studios are in cities that you'd like to live in, what kind of roles that they tend to have, just to give yourself a little bit of direction going through. The other cool thing is that most of these studios, there will be MDS graduates working at, and it's perfectly possible to actually reach out and chat to some of these people. It's like I said, it's a very given community. But yeah, I think it's important for you to sort of understand what you're going into, and games industry isn't always as vocal as maybe film is. I think a lot of people don't realize how well we're doing here and that we have some pretty big IPs locally. But it's just something that's, I think, really good to be informed about, so you can sort of imagine where you're going to go after the course. Um, I don't need to focus on this graph, but it is just to say that the global games industry revenue is increasing year on year, and it has done for the last 10 years, which is pretty great. The last thing I'm going to talk about is just that another avenue for games is actually finishing your game and releasing them. You'll see Dan's been putting some of these games into chat there that have been released on Steam. I think one thing to really highlight is that this is a potential avenue for you as a artist or programmer. So here are some games that have come from the course that have been quite successful. Reverie was a game made by 3 programmers. They graduated and then decided before trying to find work They were going to make their own PlayStation game, but they basically went for it, and they ran their studio Rainbite for I think 6 or 7 years before moving into jobs in the industry. Completely funded, found a publisher, and were able to sustain themselves making their own games. The second game was Trigger Witch, which came out I think 2 years ago. Valleys Between, this was actually a second-year game that a studio saw, and when the team graduated, they brought them on a 1-year contract to build their second-year game into a fully featured game for mobile. And now, when they finished that game, all of them got work at that same studio, Dinosaur Polo Club. Currently, the producer and art director are two people from this team at Dinosaur Polo Club, which is really cool. And Sky Noon, we looked at the trailer for that. These guys, again, they released the game. That was their third year production. They put it out on Steam, I think a couple of months after they finished school. It did really well. They had a publisher, they were funded. And the cool part about this story here with Sky Noon is they decided that they didn't want to continue working on the game. They wanted to get more experience sort of in industry, and they all got jobs at Hi-Rez, got put into senior positions at the company that makes Smite Paladins based off this portfolio piece. And I think this is a really important story here, is that all of these games that I've shown, whether they're successful, or not, finishing and releasing, shipping your own game of this kind of quality is really the best piece that you can have in your portfolio. And I know sometimes, there's a concern of, do I go to industry or do I be the starving artist and try and make it? In games, that starving artist option isn't really so risky because, as long as you're not putting too much money into that, if you release your student project and it does well, that's amazing. If it does or doesn't do well and then you want to work at a studio, this is kind of your golden ticket to getting in there, especially if it's something that's been validated by the public. So all of these students who released these games, who made these companies, after a number of years, decided that they would want to go and work in industry, and they entered much better positions than they would have been able to get based off the fact that they had these things in their portfolio. The last one I'm going to show, I need to update my screenshot, but this is a game from last year, Bronzebeard's Tavern. This is a free-to-play game on Steam, currently rated overwhelmingly positive, and it's got over 2,500 reviews now. You can see at the time of my screenshot, it was only about 1,000. But this game's been doing really well, and these guys are working on their second game at the moment. Yeah, I think it's had 500,000 plays, which is pretty incredible for a game that came out just out of the classroom. They didn't do any more work on it when it released, besides what they had. So again, when these guys decide to go to a studio, they're going to have a much easier time because they've released something that's been proven to be successful. I don't know, I find games personally exciting and I'm interested in them. So there should be some intrinsic motivation here as well. It's been said that if you want to come to games just to make quick money, there's probably easier ways to do it. You could find another industry, do accounting, do something that has a clearer path. But if you're excited about games, if you're finding this rewarding, if you are willing to put in the time to kind of get to the top of your discipline there, yeah, it can be a really great industry to be in. Someone in chat says they've been developing a game in Unity, and you just got the Steam SDK. You don't know the ins and outs yet. Will the course help with that? Not immediately, no. I mean, using an SDK becomes easier when you've got more experience in the engine, more experience programming. Honestly, the SDK stuff is generally the easier part, but I will admit Steam is a little bit tricky, not because it's hard, just because the documentation can be hard to find. But on staff, there are a number of lecturers who've released or are currently maintaining live Steam games. So yeah, absolutely, you can get help with it. But I think it's sort of that thing of like, you got to, crawl before you can walk, before you can run. So we wouldn't really be starting with stuff like Steam and game release. In year one, for example, it's definitely more fundamentals to programming and art to get to the point to actually be able to make something. Can game art qualifications cross transfer into movie CGI VFX? Yeah, definitely. 100%. It's actually becoming more common, particularly if you spend time using Unreal. The last 2 recommendations that I gave for students like applying for work were for film work at a VFX house, and another one for Weta. And the reason is that the film industry is pivoting towards real-time engines. So traditionally film does what's called rendering. So they would set everything up. They have the animations and the camera and all of this in a virtual environment, and they press render. Then they wait half a day or more on a very expensive computer or multiple computers to render the scene out to get the quality they need. But the change in the industry that's happened is that film is moving towards real time, where they're actually running something like Unreal, um, and they can edit the scene live. They're doing what's called virtual production. If you're interested, have a look at that, virtual production. And essentially what it means is there's crossover. So if you're an artist, 3D modeling workflow is the same really at this point, although film can probably have a higher poly count. But if you're going for like a film job, you're still using Maya just as you are in games. Animation, same thing. Rigging, the same thing. And now using engines, we're seeing programmers getting roles as well. A little bit less common, but it is happening. Things that are more technical, setting up, shaders, animations, materials. Technical art is also a really big space. So yeah, you definitely can. What percentage of MDS students successfully go into employment after graduating? That's an interesting question because if you take the official stats, it's probably quite high. And you'll see that most schools are. I don't know off the top of the head what our one is, but it's probably 80% or something. You'll see other schools too claiming to be 80, 90, 100 even, I've seen. What's important to ask with that question is not how many of them go into employment, but how many of them go into specifically games employment. Because when we talk about related employment, we would actually include students who get jobs, say, in graphic design, or a student who's working in advertising, or a student who works at a media company. And it depends on the student and if that's a good outcome. It would include students going into IT if they were a programmer, for example. So what students get into a profession. And yeah, most people do. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But most people coming here are coming here because they want to get work in games. And I'll be pretty upfront about this. This number is a lot lower than the related employment category. And the reason is, like I said, it's just very competitive. And, for better or worse, not everyone graduates with the same level of portfolio. The games that I've been showing, the show reels, the trailers that we've been looking at, for the most part, all of those teams found employment, often within 6 months, or if not immediately from graduating. The best I've seen is entire teams being offered a job. We had in 2022, we had 2 teams just hired straight as 2 teams picked up. They did a group interview and just were all hired as a 2-team segment. That's insane. I haven't seen that very often, but it's possible, right? But if I were to find some of the weaker games, some of the ones where the students weren't as strong, where they didn't put in as much time, you have to understand that at tertiary education, we can give you the classes, we can give you everything you need, we can run the subjects, but whether or not you get good at it comes down to you practicing that, you using it in your own time, you building the assignments. I'm a super last minute person. I do things as late as possible. Hey, I was 5 minutes late today. So I know what it's like, but you really have to have a certain level of discipline and motivation to come and do this course. It's not an easy course. If you're really sort of struggling and you are coming just because you like to play games and you think that would be fun, and maybe you think you need a degree, or your family tells you need a degree, I don't know if that's the best reason in this case. I mean, I think education should be open. I think if you want to come here and just learn to make games, that's fine. You should be able to do that. If I'm, when I'm retiring, if I'm 65 and I've got the money and I decide, hey, I want to go learn something, I should be able to go do that, right? That's fine. The love of education, but you got to be realistic what you're coming in for. If you're serious about getting into the games industry and you want to have those portfolio pieces and positions, you have to treat this course really like a job, and you have to do a lot of self-study along with what's being taught. And hold yourself to a high standard. It's definitely not a course that, even if you can pass by doing things last minute, missing a lot of classes, not communicating with your team, not really trying to add any depth beyond what's happening in the classroom. You might get through, on C marks, but I would say the students in that sort of lower half of the class definitely struggle to get work a lot more. And that's where we see probably people going into adjacent industries. Sometimes this can be a good thing. I've seen some programmers who didn't get into games right away, went into general software engineering, found that they actually really enjoyed it. They had good career progression and actually started to earn pretty good money. And, 3 or 4 years later, when I ask them, hey, are you still trying to get into games? They say, no, actually, I'm pivoting completely. I'm loving what I'm doing. So you got to be open-minded as well, you know. I've been making games most of my life. Obviously not when I was a young child, but I started when I was 10, just sort of self-taught. But my own studies were, my bachelor's was in English and I did my master's in film. And now I'm, you know, completely dedicated to teaching games. So you never know where these paths take you. But yeah, to answer the question, I would say top third of the class gets employment in games industry. They all do. As you start to go down from there, the next third is probably employment in adjacent industries. So other art jobs, you know, it could be film, it could be web, it could be media, probably less print these days, IT, programming. There's really a pretty big list there. And then the bottom third, I mean, if you're an employer, would you want to hire a student from the bottom third of the class? That really answers that question. Some of them do get good jobs based off their other abilities. Maybe they're good communicators. You know, maybe right place, right time. Maybe they did a project that was exactly the kind of thing that a company was looking for. But in terms of being like really desirable, yeah, you've got to work hard. Will AI replace game art and VFX in the future? I find this an interesting question because I see a lot of people speculating on AI that know less about AI than I do, but I am reluctant to give that speculation myself. And the reason is, you know, we're talking about this as a career, right? We're talking about this long term. Will AI replace all the game artists next year? No, that's not happening. Um, we could say the same about programming. What about 3 years? I don't think so either. But if we start to stretch that time scale, what will it look like in 10 years, 20 years? Honestly, I can't give you a prediction of what that's going to be like. I think anyone who is not being honest because we don't know where that technology is going to take these industries. What I think will happen, this is my personal view, because we're also already seeing it happen, is just that AI tools are just going to become more integrated in existing workflows. So we already have it if you're an artist. I don't know if you've used like Photoshop yet, but you know, we have things like generative fill, we have the healing tool, we have even things like blur filters can be using AI. I think what we're going to find is that AI tools get integrated. A lot of programmers are already using ChatGPT for sort of personal tuition and problem solving. But we're very far, I think, from a click a button that's make game, and an entire game comes out without any human hands on it. And the argument I see a lot of pro AI people saying is that, you know, I don't need to learn art, I don't need to learn programming because I will just learn AI. But here's the thing. If it gets to the point where the job can be done by AI and they're going to have, say, a prompt engineer running their AI, I just don't see that happening because the company would rather hire an experienced artist or programmer to work with the AI, because if you don't know what you're doing, how are you going to troubleshoot it? How are you going to implement what it gives you? So yeah, I don't think it's possible to tell you exactly what's going to be happening here long term. But currently the environment that I've seen and the feedback we've gotten from industry is that they're watching what's happening. A lot of studios, most studios aren't officially using any AI tools because there's some what do you say, debate around the data sensitivity and the copyright of how these tools work. But when they do start using them, it's about integrating it into their existing teams, not like replacing the art department with an AI. Hope that answers your question, but it is a very difficult question to answer at the moment. But what I can guarantee is if you have someone who's an experienced art director, worked on a ton of games, and you have someone off the street who knows how to use an AI, it's the art director that's going to get the job, because with that level of experience, it's going to be much easier for them to learn how to use an AI tool than it is for someone who can use an AI tool to learn the entire production pipeline from the other side. For the math component, do you know a suitable resource outside of this course to practice? Maybe a Udemy course? Honestly, anything that I'm talking about here, there's such a wealth of information online. I don't have one off the top of my head that I would recommend, but the math areas that you would be wanting to look at that are going to be most useful for games, I'll just put them in chat. I think algebra, trigonometry, geometry, and then just like basic sort of number stuff, which I guess is going to be covered by algebra probably. I think are probably the the best 3 areas to start with if you're wanting to boost your confidence. And yeah, finding a course on YouTube, finding something on Udemy, yeah, something that you're just motivated to watch, that you click with the instructor, I think is a good start. Same thing for artists, you know, if you wanted to just sort of get a head start on some of this stuff, any beginner course to this tool, 3D tool, 2D tool, is a good place to begin. When you're starting out, I think one of the most important things in learning is motivation. You know, the person who see, there's a bit of a tangent. There's a lot of paralysis, you know, learning this kind of stuff. Search on Reddit, which game engine should I use? There are so many topics about this. Like, people get stuck on it, and then they try one, they try another one, they dip their toe, they change their mind, and they don't make much progress because they're paralyzed by this decision of, should I use Unreal or Unity, or should I actually use Godot or GameMaker, or you know, should I use Maya or Blender? Honestly, this doesn't matter when you're starting out. The thing I would pick is the one that you're motivated to use. If you find a particular tool that you are excited about, that you want to spend time in, spend time in it, because it's kind of like learning a language. When you've learned one of these tools, you can transition to the other one very, very quickly. You, yeah, are investing time and just getting better at this stuff, and it doesn't matter too much where you're spending it to start with, as long as you're doing what you want to be doing. You're programming, you're learning math, you're working in a game engine, you're making 3D models. Do what excites you, right? So that's my advice. But at the same time, the course is also aimed at a complete beginner. So, like, for example, on the outside, we assume you've never done 3D before. We assume you've never opened a game engine before. So you will be talked through everything as well. Cool. Thanks, Dan. I realize we're at time, so I might wrap up there. If you've got any more questions, I think, Dan, do you want to put your email in the chat if they don't have it already? And you're welcome to contact Dan about admission questions.
Yeah, I'll put the email in there. Thanks, Jordan. Fantastic.
Yeah, no
chat
problem.
as always. I'll put my email in here if anyone is interested in applying as well. You know, definitely send us an email and jump online by the website. Now, once you complete the online application form, you'll get a Dropbox link as well. So any documents, you can send them straight through to there. But yeah, looking forward to hearing from you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for your time, guys. Yeah, look forward to seeing some of you.
Cheers, guys. See ya.